And so they asked to be able to conference in, but I think they're having issues out there as well because of week. So their data is not also gone the way they expected. So I think I'm on the phone. Tom, is that you? Can you do that? Yeah. Okay, so we'll do that. And so our first order of business is to approve the meeting minutes. So we'll look those over. Any concerns or comments? We'll just accept those as approved.
I'll make a motion to accept it.
Okay.
Second.
And then I'm going to let Jennifer walk you through the report format option.
All right. So if everyone has fun with their homework and looking at the strengthened elements, the template that we came up with should look extremely familiar. We tried to keep it consistent as far as the logos. What we have provided you is actually two different options that using the same template. So what we were, based on our discussion at the last meeting, we were really looking at keeping the same goals that were stated in the Envision CR that was adopted by council. We've also added at the top the city council goal that is with each of those elements. Again, to keep that alignment with what has already been approved. What we have provided are really some options for putting in objectives. So what we had talked about before, and if you go back to the charter itself for this group, it really talks about goals and objectives. So we wanted to make sure there was a piece of that that really spoke to the objectives. So under Strengthen CR in that first page, the option that we had was kind of more of bullet pointing, some key objectives. Again, thinking about taking kind of those higher level goals and trying to think of things that we should be thinking about when we are moving forward with implementing those goals. Thinking of some of the groups that you represent and some of the different lenses that we should be considering when we're doing these. So option one is really looking at the format of bullet pointing those. We actually had a fun little game in our department as we were putting these together to try to keep them 6 words or less, which sounds easy, but it's very hard. So that's one way to approach this, and one template. On the second page then, it's again Strengthen CR. Another way to do it, and this was kind of more in line with what the last long-term planning commission did, and that was to do it more in a sentence structure or more of a narrative. So it would be taking, looking at the goals and putting the objective more in a phrase or a couple of phrases, but more in a sentence or narrative form. So that would be another way that we thought this group could go about it if the objective was kind of the way you wanted to go. And then the other templates are just those other elements. And again, showing how that may lay out to both include the council goal, the goals that are already in Vision CR, and then a place for this group to really talk about objectives, if that is how you want to move forward.
So, yeah, we left it last time with that.
So, since we're focusing, we said we take one of these at a time. So we have to decide which path, that is a bullet point path or just sort of a general statement path. That's one to do tonight. And then depending on what path, pick, either agree or suggest alternatives to what's here.
Correct.
So those are 2 work activities this evening.
Yep.
Thank you.
And we would, offer certainly that if you feel, we should have some time to break up into groups if you wanted to go past that first assignment of strengthen. Some of you probably have read ahead. If not, you sure can do it while you're sitting here too. So we want to give you that option as well to use the time wisely and get farther in, so you can have those good conversations to get farther tonight than we had planned. So I think reactions first to that concept of, does this, after the discussion we had last time, the struggle, and, I know a few of us have talked since then. I've talked to Mayor Corbett as well, and kind of talked through that dilemma last time, our first meeting, about the fact that the council just adopted that, the Envision CR that seems like long-term goals and objectives for the city, and actually, Mr. Townsend was in that meeting, so good timing to walk in. Just commenting on the conversation that we had, and recognizing that is a true dilemma. Certainly the charter authors did not anticipate that we would have timing like this. That is just so very on top of one another, of having the requirement of this charter at the same time that you have a newly adopted comprehensive plan that seems to address those things. And the desire not to be, in conflict, certainly with what the community just spoke through, lots of public input engagement, and also what the council just endorsed. So, wanting you to feel very comfortable with what the role of the commission, at the same time of, recognizing, the effort that went into the comprehensive plan. So what we had asked about last time was the idea of putting together, some options of templates, some ideas about what could this document look like, harkening back to the 2007 version that we sent to you, then the 2010 version. What should this year's version look like, keeping in mind that it's in a little different realm with the Envision CR plan recently adopted. So we took a stab, what you see in front of us is page 1 and 2 is a stab by our staff of putting together a template of what something could look like if the group chose to go this way, of option 1 with bullet points, option 2 with kind of a statement that speaks to those elements of the goals, the elements of the Envision CR document. It gives you a path, I guess, to make your own statement, to put just one more different perspective, one more, well encompassing look at the Envision CR document and what it means to the city and to the community as a whole. So,
for what it's worth, and again, to get the conversation started, it seems to me that our final report is like about this size, saying we adopted vision thing, and here's some statements. That I would be okay with the green box approach where you have 4 or 5 statements. Seems to me that, without agreeing or disagreeing with these are the right words, but it seems to me to try to encompass when we all agree on one sentence means 25 pages. You probably got a better chance of inclusion of 4 or 5 bullets that everybody can say, oh yeah, that's what I was concerned about in that bullet. I'm okay if there's 4 or 5 bullets.
I think it helps to simplify the different components too, so they're not all interrelated, or simpler to review and look at.
that first, this example.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I think as we practice this, we can do that same conclusion. Others?
I'd like to go with the bullet point approach. I think as others have said, it's more encompassing to different thoughts, and you're not trying to,
Wordsmith something.
summarize something, multiple different views into one sentence.
I think it too, easy for other people to read, succinct, yeah.
Concise in helping us to interpret what this group was.
I think it's more concise and leaves less to interpretation.
We're thinking, Randy, right now, we're considering this first step. Any concerns? All right, well, pleasure of the group. Certainly want you to do what's comfortable for you. We can talk about this first one and actually go through and comment on, what we provided you there as a, get you kind of ready for it.
Can I
we could do
make
as
an
a
observation,
Sure.
kind of quick? I happen to live in one of the neighborhoods in Cedar Rapids that does not have a neighborhood association. And I think, from what I read through here, Strength and CR, a lot of the things that are happening are based on being able to do it through neighborhood associations. And I think it would be, if this is the case, then I think it's really important for the city to move forward to these neighborhoods that don't have an association and give them reasons why they should have an association and encourage them to do so. I live in Sun Valley. We all know Sun Valley has flood issues and other things over the years that we come together as an association, but we don't have a standing one.
Right.
And I think that's the weakness, what is being looked at in Strength and CR.
Great. And it mentions that, it mentions, and, of course, I worked in neighborhoods for a long time, so it's certainly a gap, when people would call and say, which one am I in? Sorry, you want to start one? That's what we would say.
I was curious too, if there could be an explanation of the city's neighborhood certification program. I've never heard of that. I was kind of curious what that was.
Absolutely. Yeah, do you want us to, we can give you a quick synopsis for.
Yeah, so for, again, getting back to this, so the existing neighborhood associations that we acknowledge, we currently do have staff go out to those monthly meetings, and there's a team assigned to them. So we want to get those resources out to them. And so that's something we do in all of those existing neighborhood groups. But in addition to that, we really saw that there was a gap. We have 5 of our traditional existing neighborhoods that qualify for federal funding under our Community Development Block Grant Fund, while all the others do not, which is clearly a gap. So what we were trying to do, or what we have put together, is a way to use some local funding to have people be able to apply and get that funding, even if they're not eligible for the federal program. So what we're trying to do is leverage those federal funds and get those funds to the existing 5 that qualify, and then create a program for those other ones. So this is the first year that we work with those groups. We did 6 workshops with them, had the neighborhood associations identify what are the types of things that you need to build capacity in your own neighborhood association. So how to run a meeting, how to get volunteers, some different outreach activities, and did that with them. And then also we're working with them on writing a work plan. So in the next year, what are the projects, what are your top priorities for projects that you want to do? And what are the things that you need to get there? So again, kind of working through that process of that planning and working to build capacity in those neighborhoods. So we've done that for the first time and had that process go through, and we are taking those to the council meeting actually on February 24th for approval of those the funding for those. So we're very excited. So it's, if you're certified, so if you've gone through the workshops, you've done the work plan, and you're certified, then you're eligible for up to $10,000, whether it's federal or city. So
Who are the 5 that have qualified?
the 5 that always have qualified are Wellington, Oak Hill Jackson, Mound View, Taylor, and Northwest.
Oh, Northwest.
Yeah.
Many of these neighborhoods been around, associations been around a long time.
Yeah.
All 5 of those.
All 5 of those. yeah.
Because they were, created by that federal funds back in.
What percentage of the city geographically would those 5 groups contain? Roughly?
Very core. I mean, not
Third.
past 19.
No, like, I would say
All be urban
8%.
renewal, think
It's
urban
urban
renewal
renewal.
around this core city,
Yeah.
the
So
requirement.
what percentage do you want to have bold moves to encompass? Do you want the whole city, or, would a bold move be to take the city and split it up into 15 different groups, and then if an issue arises in a community, like somebody brought up, then all of a sudden you have a group of people, and You
Well, we've
could say,
always-
hey, start an association.
I would say what we've always, the philosophy we've had in the past is that we, need to make neighborhood associations, the benefits of being a neighborhood association attractive to citizens to spend their time, their volunteer time in that capacity. We have not had that in the past, where, the benefits just weren't there to encourage the neighborhood to do the work necessary. It's a lot of volunteer labor and passion involved in doing that. When I was doing neighborhood work, there was always that dichotomy of cities. One where you said, like we do, go create your neighborhood, we will help you. We'll send staff there, we'll do programs for you, we will do our civic part to make it attractive, But you still have to do the work. You're the leaders of that. It needs to be grassroots driven. It needs to be from the neighborhood itself. Other cities that I encountered really did, just split up the neighborhood based on what I or Jennifer would sit and say, this feels like a homogeneous neighborhood, something where everybody has something in common, whether that's we're on this side of this street, we use this commercial center, those kinds of things that traditionally make up neighborhoods, and then you try to recruit somebody in that neighborhood. We have not, as a city, tried that kind of a force it on you standpoint yet. But we also haven't been terribly successful with creating new neighborhoods. As the report suggests, neighborhoods in this community have been created first by that funding source that CDBG created, and then secondly, I could name every neighborhood association that since then the reason they got created. Knowledge Park neighborhood went back to the days years ago when we tried to put the ice arena in Knowledge Park. That's where they were born out of. Kenwood was from us taking the library out of Town and Country Mall. Then they find their new purpose and they continue on and do great work and have terrific volunteer efforts. So that's a good description of identifying a gap, and that is definitely the neighborhoods that aren't covered by a neighborhood association now, and then setting that as should that be a goal, and how do you share that goal with the community? Certainly, I think it can't certainly just be all city. We need an active community to be able to do that, but the city sure can play a role. We can dangle benefits and help you engage your neighborhood and things like that.
I'm just trying to figure out how to proceed here, how even to say anything that's helpful to the cause versus.
I was going to say, I can get up with big paper
Well,
and
yeah.
and help you.
I don't know that it's particularly useful in my experience to try to wordsmith anything, because I have no idea what the word bold means. It's a meaningless word to me. I suspect I understand what it intended to mean, but words matter in documents like this.
I use you as my definition.
I see bold. I don't know that the council would allow to go that far, Ben. But my thought is that if you look at the vision report, first sentence, I think it's pretty similar in all the other sections. You look at the words, strengthen Cedar Rapids focus on strengthening neighborhoods. Okay, that's the first sentence. I would have chosen different words, and I think I even suggested livability or something back in the days when we did this. And then the entire section is about streets, infrastructure, diverse population, things that make a neighborhood. So if we're going to come back and say in a smaller document, I don't know that you need to recap it, would be my general thought. But it does seem to me that there may be elements that are missing that would be helpful to get out on the floor. As an example, as you format this, and each neighborhood would be different, as we all know, you might format this bullet with a verb first, and then one or two words, like, you said something on housing stock, think preservation where applicable. Or, some overarching themes that would be applicable to some neighborhoods and some that aren't, as opposed to trying to go down here and figure out the words.
Oh, right.
Because you've come up with these words, they mean something to you, I don't know that they mean the same thing to me or anybody else. it seems to me what we're trying to do is to reinforce the vision report so that the city council takes appropriate moves or appropriate steps to ensure sustainable and livable, if we want to say neighborhoods, and again, that's even a nebulous word, okay? Because what the challenge I always had with neighborhoods is that you could, in a limited funding situation, you could pit one against the other, and that's why I was never for having everybody have a neighborhood, and then everybody gets the X amount of money, because not all of you need the money the same, and that's why the government set it up. The money went to the poor neighborhoods. Okay, end of conversation. I mean, bad program or good program, but it didn't go to Bowman Woods. And Bowman Woods got all kinds of issues, I suspect, traffic and other things that they would be concerned about that have nothing to do with Wellington Heights. So it seems to me that we want to say something that is overarching, that the council needs to take steps to ensure livable neighborhoods or sustainable neighborhoods. And what does that mean? Invest appropriately in infrastructure, because I think that's a big challenge. Okay? The school districts are in all these neighborhoods. They've got big facilities in all these neighborhoods. Many of the issues caused in some of these neighborhoods are because the schools are closing. Okay? That's nothing to do with the city. Okay? Think of all the daycare programs and after school and Head Start and things that are in these and enhanced programs or at Johnson and these other neighborhoods. The city had nothing to do with those. And yet they are important to making those neighborhoods better and livable. So I think we got to say something about the city council investing and thinking where appropriate, because it is really easy to slip over the line here. And I think they've got enough challenges with their money. Now, if we want to say something that recognizes this dichotomy of governmental subdivisions that cumulatively affect the livability of neighborhoods, then that may be something we want to say, if we think it's lacking today. If we think the lack of communication and a lack of joint funding and a lack of joint programs with the Cedar Rapids school system is a real issue on making certain neighborhoods better, then we ought to say that, if we believe it. It's been that way 45 years since I've been here. The schools have always had the biggest impact on the neighborhoods. Okay? The schools don't want to be in these neighborhoods. Okay? Look what they're doing. I mean, again, I'm not arguing about the school board. I'm just saying Cedar Rapids was set up on these neighborhoods where each neighborhood was a city. It had grocery stores, it had retail, it had a school, it had a park. Okay? And it was formed around a central hub. The jobs were all within 4 blocks of the river. So we need to say something that gives guidance to what we think the council ought to be thinking about for the next number of years.
All right, so what I hear you saying is more global statements, which, you know, I think are great. I mean, that idea of giving a little more direction. What you're seeing examples are things that we came up with the concept of things that need extra emphasis, things that need to be called out. I don't think those two things need to be mutually exclusive, but I think you're on the right, you know, like Todd's comment about, you know, existing neighborhood associations. If we're going to put emphasis there, let's maybe call that out. Making sure these things are, these are city priorities within neighborhoods that Tom's referring to. Actually, the shared responsibility and jurisdictions is a very good topical issue. So I'll write that down when I'm done. So other thoughts? If it's feels right to you guys, we're thinking that working through the strength in CR's practice so that we can kind of get it down for the other ones. What kind of tone, what are you looking for here? How do you capture the, feelings of the diversity of this group? And I think some of that is going to have to be work that you do either in small groups here today or homework and bring it back and share that kind of thing so that make sure we hear from everyone. What are other thoughts? Yeah.
Going back to what Tom said, when I got on the school board 4 years ago, one thing I learned was that aging neighborhoods in a community like ours, gonna end up with a donut hole. And so what you end up with is these schools that have 30% occupancy, and 4 schools within a mile of each other with 30% occupancy, and somebody has to do something about it because it doesn't make economic sense. So we started meeting with Jeff Pomerantz and Ron Corbett to try to figure out a way to work hand in hand. Now, this document doesn't really address that, and I know I brought that up before. And I think that if you want a strong neighborhood, you've got to have a way to create that communication, because one feeds the other. You know, the schools will cease to exist at the rate we're going, because what will happen is, as the people continue to stay in their homes and the kids are gone, and there's not a lot of new families coming in, there's no large families anymore, you're going to have a decreased population of kids. So everyone goes, oh gosh, we're losing population in our schools. No, we've got aging homes where people are not, you know, reinvesting families, and you're going out to the suburbs, and that's where all the new homes are going in where people can afford it. So it's pretty simple when you put it that way. It's not like somebody's choosing to do this and you're not driving people away. But I guess what I'm going with this is, how do you word it in a way so that the strong neighborhoods are, what's the word? They work in harmony, they work together, they,
Collaborate?
no, it's a big, anyway, it's the idea that they sustain each other. There is not one without the other. And so if you don't focus on those neighborhoods, and you continue to say, tear down houses on 2nd Avenue that families used to be, you know, with 10 kids, of course Polk's gonna close. And I don't know how logically you keep buildings open when you just don't have the student population. So there has to be like an investment, alternative investment incentive to get people to say, those areas are blighted, if you will, of families, and we've got to figure out a way to reinvest in those areas and make it incentive, make an incentive out of it.
Well, I think the neighborhood association, you know, I think what they're trying to do with the neighborhood association is kind of, because they're trying to come up with money for the neighborhood associations. And if you create more neighborhood associations with those incentives, I think you're gonna get more of that.
Or at least a
So,
conversation.
But you gotta make sure that there's less hurdles for them to go over to get to that point. I know there's a lot of neighborhood associations that have been tried to be created, that there was too many hurdles and they failed, so.
When I was on planning commission, I was there for 6 years, a neighborhood group would come forward to talk about flooding in their neighborhood. Even though they weren't really a neighborhood group, they got flooded, they had a problem. Another neighborhood group about the schools, but they weren't really formal groups. And I don't know if it's good or bad. I don't know if I hear what Tom's saying about the idea of having associations all over the place. All of a sudden you've got kind of fiefdoms fighting amongst themselves. Or is it a good thing to have those so that we have an option for people to communicate through? I mean, there's got to be a way for them not to say, you know, the Erskine neighborhood, if you will, the schools, the people that feed into Erskine, we've got a map. We know every kid that goes there. Could that be a neighborhood group? Because then they have a louder voice as one versus creating an ad hoc group when anything comes up. And that's what happens now with these non-neighborhoods, I guess, what I call them. They get created to come to planning commission and say, as a neighborhood, we don't want to see this Walmart come in here at the end of East Post Road.
They get together for a negative reason versus being proactive and trying to do some planning.
That's a good point, Jack.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I mean, if 40 years goes by in a hurry, but as I think about what has caused the demise of the inner city neighborhoods from 19th Street in and from 10th Avenue to Quaker Oaks, it is really simple. It's crime and lack of investment in infrastructure. Less people wanting to live there as a result. See how this, we're already taking the first step down in the spiral, it just goes down from there. And then ultimately, the school board, thinking they're doing the right thing, says, city council, go rezone 80 acres out someplace on 42nd Street so we can build a new school. And what's the city council do? They go rezone the property. Instead of saying, we're not rezoning a damn thing for you until you and we work together to figure out if we can make this work right in Polk and right in, okay, if you really want to take a bold step, that's bold. Okay, we've never done that here. We've recognized the jurisdictional boundaries of the elected official. Okay, but think about Bill, you've been around here, Dave, you've been around, think about it in the last 35 years. What's destroyed the inner city neighborhood? The very first thing is the schools. And that's a result of about 4 steps before, starting with they're not safe. Okay? So there's a role for the council to be bold. Okay? No one who doesn't live there is going to be living there.
I'd give an example of that bold move, and that was Tier 1 of Roots Housing.
Yeah.
And it's back on their docket right now, and they're getting heat for it. You know, how dare you make us build in Tier 1, which is those core neighborhoods feeding these inner city schools, when I can build easier. Walkable schools.
Well, the only reason they make it easier out of the edge cities, as you well know, is because the city council and the taxpayers pay for the street, pay for the sewer, pay for the water, then they get 39.5 cents on the dollar. And somehow the developers think, well, gosh, that's a big deal. Okay? There isn't a subdivision in Cedar Rapids in the last 40 years that has paid for the city's investment. Not one.
We used to have the percentages.
So
Yeah.
if we're going to have
It's gonna be like
a document that
$350,000
says the city
house.
council is going to say something, we're either going to say something bold, which will piss everybody off, or you're going to have something that says, okay, here's the bullets, and you keep going. So I think that's a threshold. Now you're.
Oh, I'm just telling you, you're fitting my definition, Tom.
But these things are not unrelated, is the point. A planning document that allows us, the school board, as an example, to go out and say, well, that 40 acres is designed for schools, so approve my zoning, does nothing to produce, in fact, is working against your very first statement of preserving the neighborhoods. It's inconsistent.
But what's the other side to that? Anybody? I mean, we have a diverse group here, you can't all
Well-
completely agree with that.
I don't know. I do agree with some of it because I live in Wellington Heights. And it is, it's a thriving neighborhood. And their neighborhood association has taken great strides to strengthen that. And also to show strides of the changes that they're trying to make. Instead of the inner city neighborhood that is full of crime, they've been, taking great steps to change that perception, because it's not that way. It is walkable, it is nice, it has neighbors who still know each other. But what I can say that I agree with Tom is that quit giving incentives to go further and further out into the suburbs. If you want to strengthen your inner city neighborhoods, then you need to put incentives for developers and for people to reinvest in those neighborhoods. And you also need to reinvest in the infrastructure of those neighborhoods because it's old and there's lots of items that need to be addressed, whether it's sidewalks, the quality of the streets, the quality of the sewer system, I just think that you need to rebrand that area and show that they're revitalizing. You've got the medical corridor right next to some of these, and that's a wonderful opportunity for that whole, well, how do we have the people from the medical corridor decide that they want to live in these core neighborhoods? It's right next to where you work. Why wouldn't you want to live there? They're wonderful, beautiful, historic buildings. And there are incentives for living in a local historic district. Why not remarket those neighborhoods and show how you can, revitalize them that way by showing what a wonderful situation it would be is if you engaged something like the medical corridor into those neighborhoods that the doctors, nurses, or the other medical employees that are there live in those neighborhoods, and it's walkable right to their.
So we have the chair of the med cube here.
See,
Housing.
that was one of the things when I came across this too, is I work with Main Street down in the New Vogue Czech Village area a lot. I'm their past president. And one of the things I see down there, and there's a lot of places, and it's kind of a result of the flood, is we have plenty of property inside the city limits of Cedar Rapids for infill. And the city, I know the city kind of takes a stand about, we're not going to build new subdivisions, we're going to force, we're going to try and get more infill. But I would like to see part of this being saying, we have a lot of open property inside the city limits that already has utilities, already has infrastructure, And maybe you go back in and the city council takes a stand and say, we will push infill, and then take the developers who have to go out and they do a subdivision, they have to spend money to upgrade utilities in new subdivisions, have them pay a little bit more, have them pay an overhead, and then take that money to rebuild the infrastructure inside the city limits. Close it down.
I appreciate that, and so Reed, I'm trying to think, kind of encourage mixed income neighbors, but as a facilitator, surely somebody around this table is gonna make the argument for a diversity of housing choices. I mean, I can argue the neighborhood side really well, your side, this is what you and Tom and Todd are describing. That's what I've spent a lot of my time being able to speak to. But, everybody put a developer hat on for a second, and then who's buying houses that don't want to live? Think about where some of you guys live.
It just doesn't make economic sense. I mean, it boils down to, if I'm a developer, I gotta make a profit. And so I buy in Wellington and fix up, and what's it worth? If I put 30 in it, is it worth 30 more? May not be.
I don't
And
think
also
the,
housing choices.
yeah, I don't think the developer has the global view of community, of neighborhood. The developer has the view of, I've got to get my business going.
But they come in and tell us every day, I've got people that want to buy $400,000 houses on pretty large tracts of land, not next to you, not next to anybody, we hear that all the time.
25 years ago, 3 blocks out of the loop in Chicago, 30 years ago, certainly 25 years ago, there were block after block of brownstones that were burned out. They were making meth labs, and the mayor of Chicago said, we're going to fix these up. Today, you can't look at one for less than $1 million. So don't tell me city councils can't stand up and take crap and make a stand, and developers won't come in and make a lot of money. That's the argument that the developers have used here ever since I started work here 45 years ago.
Post-flood, we saw
People
the
down
answer
in
to
the
that.
Hilo area are stepping up on 5 row houses down there, and they're putting up $330,000 for a 2,000 or 1,500 square foot row house. People are interested in living in the inner city. If people are willing to, and I do think it has to be, it's not everybody, some people do want to go out and have a $20,000 home on an acreage somewhere, but there are a fair number of people, and I think even younger generation, that want to see an opportunity to live near vibrant inner city neighborhoods.
Yeah, Alan. Come on, Alan.
I know. Symbiotic was the word I was looking for, where you have a relationship with one the other, symbiotic, but back to what these guys are saying.
I know.
Is it allowed
Now I'm
in
scared.
in Lafayette, Purdue, West Lafayette, they went and they did what Tom said, they took all the rental houses that were run down by the college kids, and they converted them and said, no more rentals in this area. And I always thought, how hard could it be to go to Wellington High and say, look, no more rentals, because I've worked with these people, and they don't really, they have a short-term mindset. They'll put the minimum amount of money in these homes and put somebody in there with somebody else, and it just turns into a mess. How hard can it be for someone to make a bold statement that, we're going to address these rental properties and not take up, right now it's more of a passive mode where you go, well, you're going to go with permitting and checking and all this stuff, but why don't you just take a more bold move? Is that even allowed to say, look, these properties in this neighborhood are no longer allowed to be rentals? Yes or no?
But you still have to get rental property for people.
No, what you do there is the Jack Hatch type of property in the world that come along and they put 150 units down there by Mercy for these nurses that can't afford those homes. They're full up. I mean, they got 50 waiting for the new one. I'm just saying that you can do that affordable housing in the proper way, but those houses along there will never really get converted into houses for kids to go to Grantwood Elementary until they're no longer rental, because they tend to just there's a downward spiral.
I will not answer the legal question of can you ban rental properties from a neighborhood and caution against, playing a lawyer. Bill may But as a city, what we've done is, one is zoning. Wellington's a good example where, there's a zoning district that you're legal non-conforming, that kind of thing, so you get into that density, and so if you're duplex stays vacant for a year, it has to go back, revert to single-family house. Many of you on chairs of commissions see that. When is that inappropriate, and you get to decide that. Yeah, so that's one way you can regulate that. The other way is our newest ordinance, Safe CR, Chapter 22A. That goes back to your first point, but I have great hopes for that ordinance to really make a difference. And it's saying you don't get to be a bad rental property. You don't get to be a bad property at all, owner-occupied, commercial, industrial, or rental. You don't get to be a non-contributor to the neighborhood, and to put real teeth in that. And say you don't get to do minimal investment. You don't get to put anybody you want in there. Everybody gets quiet enjoyment of the property. And that's how you increase those property values. That means my $30,000 investment yields me closer to $30,000. The city, we've taken that very seriously. But yeah, is that bold? Yeah, Safe CR is bold for us. Is there bolder? Is there a next step? Likely you say yes.
Well, I think the other thing that, in a general sense, is every strong community has a strong and vibrant core. If you look at communities around the country that are struggling, they have a less than vibrant core, a declining core. Obviously Detroit is a big example where you've got a ring around losing the core downtown. But if we continue to incentivize and invest redevelopment in the core, which is the oldest part of the city, for the next 25 years or so, and the core really gets larger as the city grows. The houses built after World War II are probably starting to get kind of into the core now. We can maintain that in the long run, and the outer areas can more or less take care of themselves. They don't really need our help.
Story across the country. We love this. So what are you thinking when you look at that those bullet points? How like the discussion. I think you need some of this discussion to kind of get juices flowing about what is it that you would feel strongly enough to try to make it into 6 words and put it as a bullet point. Do you feel like continuing this conversation? Do you want to break up and try to come up with some based on our conversation, and then come back together as a group and offer those up on strength? I think you could come up with some of those, and then we could actually get into maybe not wordsmithing on the com and that. It's not good to have 20 people try to wordsmith, but get ideas down, and then we can offer you some suggestions on things that you can edit a little bit next time. Does that sound?
Well, it strikes me you've got most of the words from the
Yeah,
conversation
yeah, there's lots of words.
already. I don't know if we're going to generate a whole bunch of new words to put.
Do you want to try to do it as a
With the
group?
exception, did you write down investment anywhere? You have incentive, but
No.
investment's a little, to me, they're different concepts. One
I
is
think I did. Oh, no, I said infrastructure.
sharing, to encourage somebody, and the other is, spending our money directly to build or buy or create something, so.
Sorry, I know I missed some other concepts too. Other concepts you want to make sure are up here. And then we can play with these words as a group.
Well, one of the concepts I heard Tom offer, which is really, I actually went through your stuff here in the last day, and I found some interesting things in the way it's been pulled together. And one of them is, it's very positive. It's all things we're going to do. But there's nothing that says, here's what we're not going to do. And the Tom's example is a classic of, here's what we're not going to do. And being bold enough to say, here's what we're not going to do, which is probably going to be even more controversial than warm fuzzy, here's what we're going to do, and here's the process, everybody's going to be involved. And looking for what are those things that would be truly, contributors to the good, by saying we're not going to do these kind of things, that we're going to build investment incentives for the circle or outside the circle. We're going to turn back from that. The other thing is the engagement of these other. This was a very city-centric plan in the sense that it was very bureaucratically driven. It's a great plan for the bureaucracy, but there's not really, other than talk about lots of opportunities to be part of different processes. I didn't see a lot of engagement of the other organizations you're talking about. And a 3-dimensional plan. The school district is barely mentioned. And how we work and complement each other with the schools, or how they work against each other sometimes, isn't even in here that I saw. I'm not reading it all word for word, but, and it's like, all right, if the schools aren't there, and some of these common ideas of saying, we're not gonna have all of our incentives go to the suburbs, we're gonna actually refocus our incentives for investment and development to the core, or to the core plus the, well, I mean, I don't know what you wanna do there, but, I just found a lack of three dimension to some of that, because there was very little about the engagement of those other parties, and what is their role, or what are their plans, and how do we work their plans into this plan. So those were just a couple of things, but I'd really like to kind of, what are we not to do? That'd be a great list for this group to brainstorm. It's like, what are we not going to do?
A little provocative, I agree.
Sandy, one thing that's in here in this report, it talks about the serviceable areas. And we've talked about that for years, about what areas can be serviced, which ones can't. So we come into these annexation agreements, and we can't seem to get sewer and water to them, or streets, whatever. Ron Corbett, bless his heart, has done a nice job in the last 4 or 5 years of pretty much the annexation documents that we come through Hall engineers would actually get. It would be very hard to annex property out on the edge of town. He wasn't doing it on purpose, but he was, you know, it wasn't like what Tom said. In the last 5 years, I bet we've annexed 2 properties in the city of Cedar Rapids. I don't know if you can think of that, Jennifer. There's probably been 2 properties annexed in, and it's not like it's going crazy. So one of the not-to-dos that Ted mentioned is you could create a urban service boundary, which most communities have, and says, we will not serve this area outside this line. You put a dash line on there, and if you want to do something, you know, really bold, you create an urban service boundary and say, this is it. This is our limit, and it upsets people that already bought land on the come.
As we say,
And again, let's just talk about section 1, which is really, I would call the city planning section of the vision report. It's your city plan, it's your zoning, it's your transportation. Just think about what's going to happen in the next 15 years in the Highway 100 corridor. Think about that for a moment. Okay? Cedar Rapids isn't going to get any bigger. All you're going to do is suck every tenant out of every strip mall, and any building that's over 15 years old, 20 years old by that time, they'll all be empty. And they'll be out in a new strip mall, and a new Casey's, and a new whatever, and there'll be 2 housing divisions, as I recall. Isn't there 2 in that plan on there for housing? And the rest of it's all going to be moving people around out of today's neighborhoods. Now think about that. If we just let the private market go, they're going to go out there. They're going to speculate on land. They're going to say the land use plan says that, and there'll be this big sucking sound. Okay, I can see it as well as I'm sitting here.
So Tom, I must ask you, West Des Moines, when that happened with West Des Moines and all that out there, did that Des Moines suffered there for about 10 years?
Downtown Des Moines and the inner city of Des Moines. Don't you remember? We used to make a joke of it. They used to come here and they'd say, my God, why can't we be like Cedar Rapids?
And then what happened? They'd come back.
Yep, they came back. Jeff was down there. There was a big meeting, and everybody had money, and a business in downtown Des Moines said, you want to keep this up? You're not going to be there at the end of the day. Okay? That's what happened. And they started working together. Now, Des Moines was blessed with 2.5 times as many people we got, and they got 7 homegrown companies down there. Okay, we got 2. Private, not hospitals. So it's a different environment, but think about what your city plan is going to do if the policymakers don't do anything any different. What your city will look like. Not Highway 100, because it'll all be glitz and new. That'll all be at detriment of neighborhood and strip mall and buildings in Cedar Rapids. And then, like you say, they will come in, oh my God, I gotta get this converted. I gotta be able to take a single family house to a duplex, or a duplex to a fourplex, or I'm gonna lose my money. Okay, I mean, it just repeats itself. So the question really becomes, if you really mean bold, somebody needs to find out and get Ron Corbett, if he's chairman here, he really wants a report coming that says things like that they're gonna have to deflect. Okay, because it's silly to go through that, you come up with some stuff, and then they jump all over you, Sandy, and say, who in the hell let Alan? Okay. But I'm dead serious about it, because we can finish this in 15 minutes. okay? All of us can. And it'll be fine, and it'll be a good document, and city staff will be able to check things off every time they do a project. But I can tell you, it ain't gonna change how Highway 100 looks. And it isn't gonna keep taking the deterioration of the inner city neighborhoods, okay? Until we get serious about crime and not having people that don't live here be able to come in and access social service programs in different government agencies and live in houses at 4 and 5 and 6 more than the house is worth. Until we're serious about that, neighborhoods are not gonna thrive. Okay, we just sort of said, oh, they're poor, they're fleeing a situation. And when you're putting posters up on telephone poles in Chicago saying, go to Cedar Rapids because there's no waiting period for benefits, and you can sign up for social service there without a background check, like they were doing 2 or 3 years ago, Sandy, that's why neighborhoods suffer. That takes leadership by government people. And the mayor needs to be clamping down on the social service people and say, Lynn County, you don't write those people a check. Give them $50 and tell them to go back to Chicago. I mean, and I say that to be facetious, but that's what's happening in these neighborhoods. That's what happened the last 25 years. And then single-family houses go away.
And schools close.
And schools close. And then people who really want to do something, there's not enough money to invest. It's a vicious cycle.
It doesn't take many of those.
And it does in a small area. You take it, it's like 6 houses on a row block, and the middle one is a drug place. Who wants to live next to that?
I think Scott's point too, though, I mean, I keep talking about Wellington this way, I really don't, it just makes my skin crawl, because Wellington is, a neighborhood that's come together and is, a pinnacle of what neighborhood associations can do, historic preservation, all that kind of stuff. Talk about Cedar Hills, talk about, I think another second tier, what I call a second tier neighborhood. Your point was World War II houses are now needing new roofs, I mean, think about the home loan that needs to go into that house that was built right after World War II, second tier. So go outside that core where those CDBG neighborhoods are, go out to that second tier, Kenwood, some of the areas around Norwich, probably a little closer in than that. If we don't invest there,
It's cheaper to do it now.
It is cheaper to do it now.
Because I think what you can see, I don't mean to interrupt,
No,
but
please.
you can look at other cities in Iowa. I grew up in Clinton, Iowa. My parents still live there. Wonderful city when I grew up. It's sad because the jobs left there. And the city gets all excited about building out. But when you build out with population decline, all you're doing is hollowing out your core. They just built a new $30 or $20 million middle school to consolidate both urban middle schools on a cornfield. Every kid has to get a ride to school. And when I see that, I think you people have done the exact opposite of what you should have done. You should have put it in the middle of the stinking town. You should have taken half the money and bought the properties you needed to get 20 acres or whatever you needed to draw people into town. The Catholic Church did the same thing. They closed 5 parishes, built the new church on a cornfield about half a mile away from the middle school. And they get excited about that, but they're killing their town.
And who ran the road? Who ran the water? Who ran the sewer? The city. The city doesn't do any of those things. Okay? They don't go there. Okay?
They have the highest sewer rates in the state of Iowa.
And that's my point, and I don't know if that's still today, but it hasn't been many years ago, I used to look after I left. Cedar Rapids geographically is half again in square miles as big as, half again as San Francisco. Now think about that, when you're only getting 40 cents on the dollar. Okay, you can't sustain this city, let alone try to it's too big geographically. You got 100 cents on the dollar that everybody's paying, maybe you could get the 30-year cycle of roads down to 15 and the 70-year cycle of sewer down to 30 and things of that. You can't do it when you're only getting 40 cents out of the dollar. And we're just killing ourselves by adding outward. Okay, bold move is, Mayor, Council, this is a great plan. You're not going to annex anything for 10 years. Then we see how many people show up at a deal. I'll bet you get a lot of input. Maybe we could have a real dialogue between the developers.
Alan, I wish you had
people
somebody
and the
else here with
neighborhood.
you. I hate that you're having,
Well, I think.
because somebody needs to speak
you
for
wanna-
the other side of that.
You know, you want to reinvest in neighborhoods, you need to create partnerships, you know, between friends groups and contractors and businesses, and, you know, to bring that core back together.
I was just looking at this map here, Highway 100. It blows me away. There's, 20,000 new people living around this area here, and it's mostly residential. I mean, there's hardly any warehouse. Again, when I took this on with Tom years ago, I envisioned Highway Interstate 88 when you go into Chicago. Warehouse, office, road. And then all the people live in the core, and they travel out to their jobs on the edge. But this is kind of the reverse of what happened in this planning document. Same with the airport. I always envisioned they get rid of residential away from the runways, because you got 10,000 people playing there around the runway of an airport that could be very viable. And I always thought put warehouses or offices there so that those people aren't disturbed by the jet noise. But I brought that up before, and I think what's weird about all this is that we're saying things that will contradict this document, and I don't know if that's our marching orders or not.
Others that haven't spoken yet? What other things struck you from the?
Well, I would have to say that one thing that's saying things counter to this document would be beneficial for this group. Because, I mean, just nodding and agreeing with what's in here, I don't think that does us or anybody any good.
For the school, is that what you're thinking?
Well, I mean, just generally, just saying, if we have things that are counter to this document, I don't think it's all bad.
And I honestly don't think that there's been anything here tonight that's counter necessarily the document. I think it's kind of taking it to that next level. So and again, I wouldn't be afraid of that, yeah.
Yeah, to your point, it has those.
Yeah, I mean, this
governmental
document talks
tones,
over and
yeah.
over again about focusing on infill.
Yeah.
But it talks about it as a concept, but it doesn't outline any specific actions to make it happen, other than we're gonna try to incent that, we're gonna come in
Or
and
what
talk
don't you do, yeah.
generically, or, I won't call it superficial, but it doesn't give any specific actions that it's gonna do to really drive that. But it's not like the document didn't address that. These folks who put this together know we need to focus on infill. It's in here repeatedly. The question is that bold, or is that just a statement of a goal that isn't gonna happen because we're not gonna do anything different than what we've been doing?
I think as we get into the detail of it, and the definition is very refined versus a broader concept, that's where the boldness comes in. That's where it steps up to be a new idea. And I think we should put the new ideas in here and let everything fall where they may, because, like you said, Jennifer, it's not inconsistent, or they can be consistent. They just haven't stepped up to be the bold, because the decision maybe at that time was, well, we need a more vanilla document. But I like, the pluses, what we shouldn't do, what we should do, and then just let everything fall.
What if you think about it, and that Jennifer can correct me, but, so the Long-Term Plan Commission, your group, is convened by charter every 5 years. Now, that's what the charter says, every 5 years. I'd argue probably the Vision CR document is also that 5-year time frame, but in the initiatives, you'll see that short-term, midterm, long-term, those kinds of things. But what if you focus on, what is a bold move within that 5-year time period? What if you wrote down stuff, both what you do and what you don't do, I like that says, in 5 years, we can look back and say, did you follow this?
Like eliminate infill by 50% in 5 years. Vacant, yeah.
Well, another thing that you could get into from a policy standpoint is, should the city of Cedar Rapids be TIFing development projects that really aren't infill projects, but they happen to be where something's getting redeveloped, that would probably redevelop on its own anyway? Should we have infill be real urban core plus projects which is, I think, what it originally was intended for years ago, but it's been broadening out all through the years, where it's like, almost everybody expects to get a TIF, no matter what happens.
It's a great point. The first 17 years of the existence of TIF, 1971, 1988, there wasn't one TIF project that was outside the core area of the neighborhood. It was all in urban renewal.
Like the high end for Staten
That's exactly right. And you know what? So be it. But my point is, everybody comes in and says, okay, here's the 5 things I can get, and if I don't come here, I'm going to go to Hiawatha, or I'm going to go to Timbuktu. We used to say, go. Okay, guess what? None of them went. Okay, because they knew the rule. The whole purpose of using that tool was to fix up an urban renewal area. It wasn't to incent you to go to 33rd Avenue or Bowling Street, for God's sakes. Okay? And to me, these other sections, and I want to bring that up, and I'll make it outvoted, but I want to send a signal to the council, they need to stop this, because it's taking precious resources away from things they're going to do. And I want to go back to this housing for a minute. Think about, for a moment, and I'm not picking on Scopeman, but they're the biggest home builder, I think, in Cedar Rapids. Kyle can tell you exactly, he goes out of 40 acres and builds 40 houses. He can tell you exactly how much money he's going to make in 3 years. $2 million or whatever it is, and he keeps his people together. He doesn't care that it's out there in that 40 acres. He really doesn't, right? Think if you said you were going to go to Wellington Heights. Kyle, you're not going to build over there, and you go in there and buy 20 homes, and you could still make the same $2 million. Okay? The city doesn't have to spend transportation dollars. They don't have to spend water dollars. They don't have to spend police dollars. They don't have to spend bus dollars. They don't have to spend gazillions. And the other thing I think we should be talking to them about is that they shouldn't be improving any of these projects without life cycle costing them. It's one thing to have Spokane build all the streets to city specs and give them to the city. The city's got to maintain them forever, out of property tax dollars that they only get 40 cents on. Okay, that's never calculated by the City Planning Commission or the City Council when they think about these divisions going in. A business would know more. Ted, you wouldn't do it, I wouldn't do it. Nobody would go out and spend that kind of money without thinking how they were going to maintain it over the next 40 years. Why does the city operate that way? I mean, I don't know. I mean, to me, those are bold things to tell the council because they don't have a lot of money. Spend it where it can make the biggest impact.
The home builders will tell you this, guys, 10 years before a street needs to be repaired, maybe 15. We got all these streets in downtown need repaired, guess who pays for them? Those new homeowners on those new streets. You're chasing yourself. And that's the solution. That's how they get them approved, because they're always saying, well, we need those in order to pay what we
And
already
then you
have.
come in and you tax the people because you don't have any money.
Right, and 10 years later, then you're out there fixing.
And you keep doing it. Think of how all the streets would be out in Highway 100, that there isn't $1 today, not $1 today, to pay for snow removal, traffic lights, police, fire, anything. And there won't be when it's built. And they'll be out there forever, because that money will be going to fix Center Point Road. All right? That's how far they are behind on the cycle. That goes back to this whole bigness. Geography is eating us up. Okay, the geography is eating us up. So if we really want to make certain level improvements, game-change improvements in the core areas around, you're going to have to change the rules. And you're going to have to bring investment out. And it isn't just cities, Andy. It's going to be the banks, it's going to be the hospitals, it's going to be Alliant Energy. You're going to have to go in there and slowly change the turn of the boat. And when it gets some momentum, like it did in Des Moines and some of these other places we talked about, it'll move on its own. But it's going to take, and you could make up that by just not spending this money where it's killing you out in the suburbs. If you just save that money.
I'm just trying to figure out how to turn this into something usable.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of good ideas there. I'm trying to figure out what we do with it to turn it into something that's usable for the city. But what I'm hearing at least is we're kind of moving away from just an endorsement of Envision CR and looking for ways that we can hopefully complement it. And not in the word of, not saying nice things about it, but add to it.
Yeah.
And those things that we want to add to it are these kinds of things. Well, here's the actions that you would take. You want to be bold, you said bold, here's the things the Long Range Planning Commission would say, this is what we would call bold. You're going to draw a ring around the city, and you're going to draw a border, and you're going to say city services are not going to go past this line for 10 years. You're going to do, you know, what, I mean, I don't know how to
No
put it.
school's going to be allowed to relocate until the city's convinced it can't operate where it's at now.
Yeah, I don't know what they are. You guys have done this a lot longer than that. That's why I want to be relatively quiet. I don't have a lot of experience in this kind of stuff, but I'm trying to figure out how to turn it into something.
I think we can do that by trying to start to fill in the box with objectives. One thing, I'm not too keen on going back and trying to wordsmith the goal part that a city council just adopted, well,
Less than a month
yesterday.
Yes,
right?
they did, yeah.
I mean, I just don't, I mean,
Does
I'll go
everybody
with the
agree
group
with
if
that?
the majority says we're gonna rewrite the goals that the city council just passed,
I think
but
that's, I think it's the box that we're looking
Yep.
at. Yeah, it's maybe
Okay.
consensus.
So once we
It's the
do
box.
that, I don't see why we can't say, we look at some of these goals and we refine them, and I'm okay. I mean, I'm also in the camp, I don't know who the advocate is for the other side, but I'm okay with saying it's an objective to not expand our city limits, period.
I could also emphasize, I mean, we've been going in that direction, various forms of infill, that's where our financial
That's right, and
incentives.
that's where Bill was. We could say, reduce, it's an objective to have reduced, you know, vacant spots by whatever, 30% in 5 years. I would need, you know, Alan or somebody that can help find those numbers to come up with something reasonable. So if we start to put those in the box, then maybe we can start to get to the end.
My hesitation on the kind of the comment that Bill has is, you know, this thing is already full of goals. And I think what I'm hearing is, no, we need actual specific decisions. We need.
I don't know if that's what we need or not.
Well, but I mean, I think that's a different approach.
That would be different than what we already have.
That's right,
Make-
exactly right.
And let the chips fall where they may.
That's why I said, we better find out from the chairman of this group what he really wants to see at the end of the day, because at the end, I don't want to sit here and create a political mess for him, you know, because the school's on top of him and Costco's on top of him, and, I mean, that's not my goal in life. I'm just saying, I'm not sure what their expectation is. I haven't heard from him, I assume he'll get to one of these meetings.
Yep, yep.
We'll get a speed out. They don't come to the meetings I want to come to.
Track him down.
We will. Yeah, I think it's time. This is, I mean, this was good. You know, like I said, we, you know, caught him up with kind of the conversation we had last time. We'll share this with him. If he's, you know, he'll make sure and come to the next one if he thinks you're on the wrong.
Yeah, because what I'm hearing is, for example, fill existing space, incent infill. Okay, we've already, this document already says this. What I'm hearing is, no, we also want to say prohibit incentives outside X. Now, outside the urban core, I'm not quite sure what their language would be, but it's like, that's very different. That is not in here.
That's not,
And that could be a box item. It's like saying, no, we're going to say, here's how we would define bold. Here are the things that you would need to put into these elements of bold, and it's these kind of things. It's like, and we just say it in different ways, but give them specific things to accomplish. I'm only nervous about 30% goals because there's lots of goals. I want to say, well, what's it going to take to get the goal? We're only going to incent infill, period. No tip outside of an infill.
but
Whatever.
turn it around, I tell you, Ted, I'm one who always says things sort of negatively, hit a hammer, with a nail with a hammer. I mean, you can turn it around in positive, say, you know, invest the city's limited resources in the areas that enhance neighborhood growth, or something like that. Yeah, as opposed to, I mean, they understand what that means. You don't need to say.
But the concept of describing, giving examples of what is a bold move that leads to what we think this chapter is telling us in fairly subtle and good bureaucratic terms. What would be an example?
And Dave just brought up a good point. Clearly, one of the things missing here, you talk about city service, we're not going to have viable neighborhoods in the older sections unless the number one objective is met, and that's that they're safe, 24 hours a day, every day of the year. There aren't meth labs, there aren't people on corners, there aren't this, there aren't that, and when the police are confronted with the situation, they are bold enough to go in and arrest a whole bunch of people and say, you know what, where do you live? I live in Chicago. What are you doing here?
Well, I would, but I don't like the Chicago references, but because we have a lot of good citizens from Chicago.
We have a lot of trouble from people from Chicago.
But we also have a lot of homegrown trouble that's happening in our neighborhoods.
I think
which is
how
why-
many people that had bills at Lion Energy that were wrong bills, and when we found out they were from here, eliminated a lot of issues.
But I think too, holding property owners responsible for property, and we get pushback. I mean, I don't know if you guys realize how much pushback we get about that. And we, since Safe CR was instigated, in the legislature today, there's bills fighting our nuisance chapter 22A. And it's saying you have to be contributing to the neighborhood to be allowed to exist there.
That's a great
You
move.
do not get to be deteriorating the neighborhood. And that is landlords taking responsible for criminal behavior on their property. You're responsible for the property because you own it. I know you don't live there, but you own it, you've decided to manage it, and you have to actually manage it.
Yeah, and that's an example of a bold move at that time because it was new or different.
Well, it's taken a stand in
Yeah.
a stronger way than we ever have.
And maybe what we do, you've got the ideas and minutes, or you distribute it out before the next meeting, 5 or 6 or 4 action points, if that's what we're getting to, or things to do or not to do.
Yeah.
And then we look at them and we spend the first 5 minutes next time going over strengths they are of those items. And then we move on to the next couple of them and see how that works. And if we're not getting together as a group or to do it, and
Do some
to
homework.
try and keep refining it as
I think that's a great plan. We did get lots of stuff, we recorded some of your stuff today too, and so we will do that homework for you. I mean, based on all the input you gave us, great conversation, we can do all this all the time.
start with a verb,
Yeah.
like Tom said, and an action point or a prohibited
That
point.
mix of pro, or, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and we'll give you something to react to. It's always easier to edit than create, so we appreciate your creating tonight with lots of words, and we can take that back. The next two are in your, and we can now follow that template a little bit, so.
Grow and green.
Grow and green are the next two, and I think it's a good idea. They're shorter than strength and was. Although I would tell you, you have to be a land use planner to really get all of those, so don't try to be a land use planner. We have land use planners. So read those next 2 sections. Now you have this in mind, scribble down some notes. I think it'll go faster because of this discussion, but I hope no less robust, and I also, I'm a good bureaucrat as well, so please don't take anything that I've said as personal opinions. I just want to make sure that you really get that other side out, that is the push. Why isn't that happening today? Because there is a push on the other side to incentivize outside, just as Tom described, the Highway 100 thing. But, we absolutely get that. So don't, because it's not being represented strongly in this room, we don't want you to think that is not there, because it is. So, to be very, very cognizant, and, maybe talking to friends and neighbors and coworkers during the next couple of weeks, you'll talk about this. If that's why you're brought in. You're representatives of other people. You represent the ideas and interests in the community. So talk this around a little bit. You will hear that. Well, I wasn't going to live there. I wanted this kind of housing. Luckily, we have lots of people wanting to live downtown, as you said. My kid bought Lawworks, so very exciting. But for every one of my kids, there's probably another kid buying some suburban house with a really big garage. So, keep those things in mind and balancing. But what do you want to say? So, and I think you've done. This has been really, really interesting.
I do think, Sandy, you need some guidance to be able to give us, to the extent that really the folks who are going to be the recipients of this and either say, guys, we can live with this and we'll work on this
No, we will
on
absolutely.
other governmental units. Because if they don't really want us talking about neighborhoods and the contributing factors like schools and things like that, then it's silly for me to keep bringing it up.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it
I
really
think, I think
is.
generally, I mean, I don't think there's an issue with that, what I don't know for sure, we'll get the mayor here, we apologize, we set this, and then with the legislature and all that kind of stuff, we're competing with some things, but we'll get him here, because I think now you're ready to have that conversation with him, I think, most definitely. You know, is this what he's looking for as chair of this commission, you know, does he want to give some thoughts and ideas at this point? We'll certainly, you know, prep him based on what we've done so far. With that, any other comments? So the homework is look at the next 2 chapters, Grow and Green, CR. Jot down some notes, some thoughts that you have as you do it, so that we can make sure that everyone's heard from. You know, definitely bring your own perspectives, but think also about the commissions, the boards and commissions you serve, and what, you know, if we talk to your boards and commissions, what would they be wanting you to mention as well? What are those things that you're seeing in those roles that you want to make sure and emphasize, and please let your colleagues around the table think about as well?
And actually, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I couldn't see the bottom there. I was just wondering, did we capture the part of partnering, whether it's to remarket those core neighborhoods and those type of things? We're going to need to partner with businesses and not only the associations so they become viable, but, and the other thing was, you were talking about the joint live-work units, and that was something that, a way of adding some mixed use to some of the neighborhoods to help them become more, or to sustain their viability. But I have a question on this neighborhood. When it comes to something like that, when it's an overall statement, are you wanting us to also share with, you know, how we think we're going to get to safe neighborhoods, whether it's police presence or it's different, are you wanting that detailed?
Well, I think the group has decided on the bullet points, so you have to figure out how to say that in like 6 words concept. What does that mean? What does that mean doing, and what does that mean not doing, is what I hear this group. So, I mean, it does limit you a little bit. It's not tactics. It's not what I hear you guys saying, not necessarily tactics. A little bit, don't do this, you know, but that's how I picture it. Anybody else have that thought?
Well, I think we are looking for ways to give it some 3 dimension beyond saying we want safe neighborhoods. Well, like, yeah. I agree. So how do you get there, and what are the big elements of that? I think I'm looking for that, because that's what I didn't find quite as much substance as I was thinking I would when I got into some of that.
The other thing I noticed in here, it talks repeatedly about infill, but I'd like to see that as far as one of the bullets or action plans that we're talking about with infill, that you're also talking about repurposing existing buildings. Because we have wonderful examples. I mean, Todd and I represent the preservation aspect, and we have wonderful examples throughout the city here even recently. In fact, we're sitting in a repurposed building right here, so I'd like to see repurposing also included with infill, because just because it started off as one building, one life, doesn't mean that it can't continue to have a viable life in the city as something else. So I'd like that to be included.
Oh, New Bone, that's a good example.
Oh, but, and I think
What
the
is
point
it?
is,
New Bone.
preserve the building first, unless there can be a case made why it can't be preserved.
Correct.
That's a very different thing than has existed in this community for the last 40 years. Okay, other than a few notable examples. Okay, it's tear it down because it doesn't make economic sense.
And it goes with green CR.
Yes, it goes with our very next point.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's what we can think about too, is as we get overloaded in one, these do mesh in.
I was going to say, we
always
can pull some of these out.
sleep.
So you're already ahead on
Might
that.
fit, yeah, might fit better even under some others when you tie them together that way, so. Other thoughts?
One other thing I was going to say real fast.
Yeah.
It ties into that, really. It's just like if you take the Ushers Ferry neighborhood, which has been developing for the last 15 or 20 years. One way in, and there's one way out. There's another way that can be built to get out of there. It's 10, 12 million project.
You didn't tell the price tag?
You know, if you told all the neighbors who moved out there and said, well, that's great, you all paid for it, it'd be one thing. But what could you do with $10 or $12 million in the core area of the city versus everybody knew a long time ago that there's one way in, one way out. And now that there's all these houses out there, now the pressure is building from our president and others to do something about it. Because what if something happens and there's a train that tips over by Cedar High School?
And it turns into a public safety issue.
So now we're at
Police and
a
response.
situation where, gee, we have to spend $10 or $12 million to find another access to this neighborhood out there, which makes no financial sense whatsoever, but now we have to
For the
do it
general public,
because
maybe
we
for that.
allowed this to develop without dealing with that a long time ago.
It's a terrific example of what happens when you make some decisions. Yeah, there's lots of people out there. And
It'll be double that eventually.
yeah.
I was just gonna say, you do have an opportunity, if you wanna hear that other side of the argument, we're having an open house tomorrow night, from 5 to 7, but we are, it's something that we've been doing with the development community, is having those people that are on, the Home Builders Association, or other people that we work with through the development process, to be getting their input on how things are going, and honestly, it started as more of a process discussion, and it's really turned into some of these policy decisions, so things will be having more information on the future land use map from Envision CR, but also our new economic development programs that council has adopted in June, which, by the way, are focused on the core. So it's one of those things where if you reinvest in the core of the neighborhood, you receive incentives. So
Where's it at, 5 to 7?
yeah, it's at the library. Why did you were that?
Well, again,
Alan's one of our
I think we have to.
Tomorrow.
But I think we have to be careful.
Yep.
Cedar Rapids is no different than any other community. Those folks who are in business of building houses or building buildings are going to react and they're going to plan on the rules that you have today.
Yep.
And yet you have had, that they can go into a bank, if they want to borrow $10 million, then go buy 80 acres and know what the road policy is, and nobody's blaming any of those people.
No.
All I'm saying is that you can look back 50 years and said if we wouldn't have done those things, we would have had a lot stronger inner city neighborhoods today.
So planning commission.
So the question really becomes,
Lift stations.
give them enough time to change from this set of rules to this set of rules and allow them to make the same amount of money, and they'll change.
Adapt,
Okay,
yeah.
they'll change.
And we've learned that through flood recovery, that, Skogman did a new model for infill, and it's worked well. But, I mean, it's adapt and change to the market.
Some of the core neighborhoods, take that housing driving tour. Oh my gosh, we've done some fantastic things in this community that without the flood pushing and funding, financing, that, and then good policy decisions. We've built more core neighborhood housing than most cities out there. So, thank you for your time tonight. We're going to be out of time. You know what your homework is? You are invited to the library tomorrow at 5 to 7, just if you want to continue on housing development discussion.
Right? You know that, right?
Yeah.
I know really quick.